hotel.
Yes! Settle.
Or something. Why do you ask? Because this place looks.
Welcome back to Recap World. Today we are going to recap 2021 romantic buddy movie titled Vacation. Friends, Marcus and Emily enjoy an unusual week without drunk when they meet new friends on vacation, but they are horrified when Ron and Kyla show up uninvited to their wedding. But before we begin, please consider subscribing to our channel. Now, without wasting any further time, let's begin, shall we? The movie begins with the couple, Marcus and Emily, arriving in Mexico for a romantic vacation. Marcus is little neurotic because he wants to propose to Emily and for everything to go perfectly. When they arrive at the hotel, they discover that their room has been flooded due to an overflowing jacuzzi in the presidential suite above them. Marcus attempts to book another accommodation, but the manager Marulio can only locate them to a lousy Best Western hotel room nearby. To make matters worse, Maruli reveals that Marcus was attempting to propose. Marcus is forced to propose to Emily to the scene and she agrees. Another couple, Ron and Kyla, who happen to be in the presidential suite, is cheering them on. They ask Marcus and Emily to stay with them, and despite their reservations, they accept. The two couples meet in the suite where Ron and Kyla serve margaritas to Marcus and Emily. They don't realize the salt around the rim of the glass was actually cocaine until they drink it. Later, Marcus and Emily want to go on a whale viewing cruise, but the boat is already full of visitors. Ron and Kyla ask them to go out on their own boat, so they do, with Ron letting Marcus steer. Marcus, however, fails to spot the rocks ahead of them and the boat flips over. The four are airlifted out while Marcus wants to reimburse Ron for the boat. He and Kyla thought the experience was better than typical sailing. The couple spent the entire week socializing and partying. The couple spent their final night together on the beach where Ron feels he has grown to regard Marcus as something of a best friend. Then Ron and Kyla come up with a brilliant idea of marrying Marcus and Emily that night. They lead Marcus and Emily to a cave where they meet on shaman who perform a Mayan ceremony to marry them. Following that, the two couples jump off the cliff into the sea. They return to the hotel room for more drugs and alcohol, and Marcus passes out as he sees Kyla on top of him, thanking him for the experience. Marcus and Emily are extremely hungover the next morning as they travel to the airport to catch their flight. When they arrive, Ron and Kyla are already there, just hanging out and making obscene comments about Marcus and Emily while security stands nearby. Ron and Kyla want to keep seeing Marcus and Emily and ask for their phone numbers, but the later couple claims that their phones are broke, so Ron gives Marcus his business card. Marcus and Emily are planning their wedding 7 months later. Marcus, the owner of construction company, discovers that his employee have purchased a suit for him. He regrets the fact that he won't be able to invite them since Emily's parents wanted to be intimate. Marcus is startled to see Emily's parents have invited all of their family and other rich friends to the wedding when they arrive at the location. Marcus has issues with Emily's family since her father dislikes him, and he also has issues with Emily's brother because Marcus slapped him in the face once. Later that night, Ron and Kyla storm through the venue's gate, pretending to angrily confront Marcus and Emily for not inviting them before busting out laughing at a joke. When Harold approaches, Ron swiftly wins him over by demonstrating that he is a former Green Beret. Harold agrees to let Ron and Kyla remain in the only available room, the presidential suite. When Marcus and Emily inquire what they are doing there, Kyla discloses that she is pregnant and they insinuate that Marcus played a role in this, which freaks him out based on what he remembers about the trip. The next morning, Harold invites Ron to join him and others of the fox hunt. which does not actually include hunting a fox but rather chasing after one despite the fact that no one else sees fox in forever. Marcus and Ron set off together and Ron shows Marcus how to scavenge for food. Meanwhile, Harold admits to Emily and Kyla that he didn't get along with his own father-in-law, and Emily observes that he and Marcus are experiencing the same thing. Marcus eats a rare mushroom because Ron can explain that it is extremely potent mushroom. Marcus begins to trip balls almost immediately, so Ron takes one mushroom to assist him. The two stare at one another until Marcus gets seized on by what he thinks is a fox attacking him. He's about to fetch a knife to kill it when Ron stops him to point out Harold and his party, showing that the fox was actually Harold's dog, who was playful pouncing on Marcus. Harold approaches Marcus with good intentions, but Marcus' hallucinations cause him to picture Harold as a clown and he can't stop laughing. Ron intervenes to help Marcus, claiming that he knows Marcus wants nothing more than to make a good impression on Harold. Later, Ron joins Marcus as they play golf with Gabe and his pal Bennett. While Kyla remains with Emily and her family, Emily becomes concerned because Kyla is administering special medication to her grandma Phyllis, who is normally quiet and does not move around much due to her health. While on the golf course, Ron appears to be extremely drunk and they continue to miss every hole they come across. In the middle of the game, Ron pulls out a large sum of money which he says was obtained by pawing Marcus and Emily's wedding rings. Marcus is furious until Ron wagers all the money plus Bennett's Ferrari, and Ron hits an incredible swing on the final hole for a hole-in-one. Marcus receives the rings back from the pawn shop just before it shuts. Ron notices a bird flying overhead, and because he previously told Marcus that he knows when a bird is opening to poop, he pushes Marcus out of the way just before he grabs Marcus to drop the rings down the sewer. He begins to blame Ron for all of this. Ron begins telling Marcus that he assisted Kyla in convincing a kid after doctors informed him that he was sterile, thus proving that Marcus is the father of Kyla's child. That night, the family throws a party and Marcus's construction buddies come because Ron invited them. Ron and Kyla then take the stage to tell everyone how Marcus assisted them in having a baby. Marcus tries to own it up and reveal to everyone that he is the father of Kyla's baby after their drug-fueled sexual experience before Kyla can finish her sentence. It turns out that this is not the case. After the couple's cliff dive, Ron believes that the impact of the water landing on his balls helped him to overcome his infertility and therefore he successfully impregnated Kyla. Emily gets forward and admits that she had sex with Kyla and that they were only on top of Marcus, who wasn't involved. Harold scolds Marcus, who then admits that he misplaced the ring. Marcus smacks Gabe in face again when he tries to berate him. A confrontation ensues between Gabe's pals and Marcus's construction companions, after which Marcus departs dejectedly. On their way out, Ron and Kyla approach Marcus and Emily, but two of them snap at one other couple, claiming that they never been friends and that they avoid keeping in touch with them because they are insane. Ron and Kyla are upset and decide to leave. Marcus and Emily are convinced that their wedding will not go place on the morning of their wedding. Harold then enters with the construction workers, all of whom are drunk. Harold has relaxed and admits that Marcus has been difficult to him, but he is willing to give him another chance, which Marcus accepts. Emily is later visited by her grandma Phyllis, who can now walk as a result of the medicine Kyla gave her. She gives Emily a note and a gift from Kyla, which is an apology to her and Marcus for ruining their wedding, but also an admission that the two of them haven't felt like best friends in forever. especially since Ron's own best friend died and he hadn't met another guy like until Marcus came along. The wedding rings Ron spent all day fishing out of the sewers are in the box. Marcus and Emily are devastated and go out to find Ron and Kyla. Emily recalls Kyla saying she and Ron like to go to Waffle House, so she and Marcus visit several Waffle Houses until they discover Ron and Kyla. Although the two are still angry with Marcus and Emily, the latter apologizes and Marcus kisses Ron's forehead, which he had previously stated is the ultimate expression of respect. They forgive Marcus and Emily and intend to name their child after Marcus. They agree to attend the wedding in exchange for Marcus and Emily to attending theirs. Marcus and Emily return to the cave in Mexico months later, accompanied by both of their families, including baby and Marcus, to witness Ron and Kyla's wedding. The lovers then plunge down the cliff into the ocean once more, and this is where the movie comes to an end. I hope you enjoyed it. As always, until next time.